I'm going to talk about the Dahlia cuttings that we've taken. If you are following along and you've taken some Dahlia cuttings and they are something like 2 months old, then you have some decisions to make at this stage which will affect the growth habit, in other words the shape of the ultimate plant, and also its output of flowers and the size of the flowers. And you'll need to make decisions now about where to stop the plants or pinch out the plants in order to achieve your goal. So I've got a plant in the very early stages. This cutting was taken on the 19th of April and it's now the 29th, so 10 days ago I took this cutting. It was the last of the series of cuttings that we took from the Pot Dahlias before we retired the Pot Dahlias. So this is a very young cutting. Now there are some standard rules of thumb about when to pinch out. Not a rule, but a suggestion that when you take the cutting, original cutting, that the cutting is pinched out at that stage. It's called pinching out because the traditional way to do it is to use your thumb and your finger and use your thumbnail to make the incision, and it will work because the stem's very soft. But to be a little more scientific about it, you can make a cut, a nice clean cut, using shears or an instrument like this. The advantage of doing that is that you can then, in the correct manner of things, you can sterilise your instrument after making the cut on each plant. The reason for that is that you don't transfer viruses from plant to plant. So I'm going to make that cutting here, but traditionally, usually I don't do so. I let the cutting grow a bit before making a decision about where to do the pinching out, and we'll talk about that in a moment. That's the point of this video. You would make the cut in the stem at that stage. So now we've got a cutting which has lost its growth tip, and we'll talk about what happens and why it happens as the discussion goes on. This guy will now go back on the heat mat to carry on its development. So let's take a look at some of our cuttings. We've got cuttings in two stages here really. One is that the cutting was taken within the last 6 weeks or so. But just to look at the structure of the plant so that we can talk about where to make our incision in the stem. So dahlias are organised so that the stem, it's called phyllotaxy, which is the shape of the leaves and where they are on the stem. If we look at the stem here, we've got a pair of leaves coming away from the main stem, and then the next pair of leaves is at right angles to that pair. So that pair is in that plane, and the next pair, these two, is in that plane, so they're at right angles to each other. And then the next one above that is again at the same angle as the first one. Hopefully you can get a sense of that. And the importance of that, as far as where we make our pinch and the resulting plant, is that, let's say a new shoot appeared from each of these axilli, which is where shoots do come from, then you can see that we would have a plant eventually where the shoots are emerging at right angles to each other, which would give us a nice bushy plant, one which fills the available space in a good way. That way, this way, that way, this way, and so on. This is the apex, the growing tip of this plant here. And the way that the plant physiology is organised, for most plants this is true, and certainly for dahlias, is that that apex growth is favoured, so that the plant will, if you like, put its energy into apical growth, into this part of the plant, so that this will grow, and it will steal growth from areas below it. So that although we've got buds in each of the axillae here, although we've got buds there, they're not developing. They're not developing because of this phenomenon where the growing tip of the plant is favoured. So the apex of this plant is producing chemicals which are messengers, which are communicating with the plant lower down and sending a message to tell the plant how to behave. So we call those auxins. There are some other chemicals, and there's lots of work going on at the moment to see how this all actually works out, but I think the first of the chemicals to be discovered was the auxins, and therefore we'll just talk about those. So the tip of this plant is making auxins, and those auxins are then transported down, lower down the plant, and, if you like, sends a message. So what the message that they're sending, well, it's two messages. One is it's sending a message to the buds further down to not grow. It's saying, don't grow because I need all the strength of the plant in order to make my journey upwards as quickly as possible. And you could see the advantage to the plant for that one is that it's trying to gain ground on other plants that may be around it, which are trying to get to the light and shield this plant. So this plant will make a dash for it as high as it can, so that it can reach the light before its neighbouring competitors. And that's called apical dominance, and dahlias are really good at it. However, it's not what we want as plant growers, for various reasons. So, let's say we would like this plant to be a bushy plant, a plant which has got lots of growth in the lower part of the plant, rather than putting all its energy into simply growing upwards. So the plant wants the apex to grow, we want the buds below it to grow. And the answer is simple. We pinch out, we stop the apex from growing, and therefore it stops sending its auxins down to the lower part of the plant, and these buds will then develop. So we have to make a decision, is that what we want? And if it is, at what place in the stem would we like the new buds to start to grow? Gardeners like having rules, and there's one rule for dahlia growers is that you wait until the plant has 4 or 5 sets of leaves and then make the cut. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. So if you've got a cutting which therefore has a single stem, tubers may have a number of stems, something we'll talk about again in the future. So if we've got a cutting which has got a single stem and we'd like a bushy plant, we'd like a plant with more leaf growth and more flowers, we'll come to that, then we would make a cut appropriately at the appropriate place in the stem. So let's look at this plant and decide whether we're going to make our pinching out cut now or not. So if we cut across there, we will have this bud set, and this bud set will be then stimulated into growth. So I imagine as the plant grows into a large plant, we will have 6 side shoots growing in different directions, making what I think you will agree would be a bushy plant. If that's what you want to achieve, then that's the place to make your cut. Let's say you're taking your dahlia to an exhibition and you would like the largest possible dahlia, so that you would allow the apex growth then to continue, because eventually, some weeks' time, you will get a flower at the end of this apex growth, and if all the energy is allowed to channel into that apex, and if you do some sacrificial treatment, in other words, if you reduce any other flowers that are trying to grow, then you'll have your one very large flower at the end. But for us as growers, getting as many dahlia flowers as we can from each plant, the ideal situation is where we have a nice bushy plant with as many shoots as is wise. I say that because if you allow too many side shoots to come, then you will have all the energy of the plant will go into so many different flowers that the flowers themselves will be smaller. So you'll end up with lots and lots and lots of flowers, but they may not be big enough for your purpose. If you're growing a plant in your garden for decorative purposes, then you will need to think about how large the plant is, whether it fits in the space, whether you'd like it to be quite tall before it starts to put out its side shoots and hence its flowers, so it's competing with other plants around it and therefore needs to be quite tall. So you'd like the growth to occur higher up on the stem, so that you'd make your pinching out cut rather higher. So we'll make a decision now whether we pinch out this plant here, so that we'll have 6 side shoots develop. Possibly the lower ones won't develop, so we might have 4. And is that good enough? Well, have I got rules of thumb? Not really. Make a decision based on each plant and where we are in the season, whether I want plants to catch up, so to speak, and what else is growing near it, and how closely we have the plants together in the planting system. So for me now, I think it's not unreasonable to do a cut there, but we are restricting ourselves to a relatively few side shoots. So it's also reasonable to allow one more. These are called internodes. That's the part of the stem which, once this grows, now it will grow quickly. So one more internode to develop, and then we'll cut off the apex so that we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 side shoots from this plant at that stage, and that's probably what we'll do. And this just developing. There's just about enough to make a cut there, so I'll do so. I've zoomed in and hopefully you can see where I'm intending to make this cut. Leaf axilla. We'll separate these two axillae, these two side shoots, and you can now see the growing stem in there. We'll probably allow it to grow a little more before we make the cut, but for demonstration purposes I'm going to make the cut. There. Now I hope you can see the result here is that our shoot, which was carrying the apically dominant bud, is now cut. So the Auxins flow has stopped, and now below it all of the leaf axillae, each carrying a bud, will be stimulated to produce a side shoot. So can you see we're going to get 2 here, 3, 4 here, 5, 6 here, 7, 8, maybe down there too. So we're going to get 8 side shoots as a result of making that pinching out cut. So I think and hope that that will be the correct place to make this pinching cut. This plant is 9 weeks old. Nice firm stem, lovely leaves, and we've got 1 set of axillae, 2 sets of axillae, 3 sets of axillae, 4 sets of axillae, and then a growing tip. So we can say, okay, let's have 4 side shoots on this plant, shall we? That's not unreasonable. Now we make the cut. So we can see what we've got. 1 set of leaf axillae, 2 sets, 3 sets, and there's our growing tip. Now we can say, okay, we'll take this and allow 6 side shoots to develop. Done. So to recap, as regards pinching out, the purpose of pinching out is to make later development of the plant what you want from that plant. And there are some general rules. One general rule is that as you take the cutting, you can do the pinching out then, which will produce a shorter plant with lots of bushy growth in the lower part of the plant. If that's the habit that you want, if that's the shape of plant you want, then it's fine to make the cut at the stage of cutting. More usually the cutting is allowed to develop 4 or 5 sets of leaves, and then the tip is cut out. But if you understand what will happen after making a cut in a particular place, then you can make your decision as to what sort of plant you want. I hope that discussion helped, and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye for now.